Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. First talk of the new year. And today's topic is, what do you want? And I was writing the essay this week and thinking about how many different ways you can ask that question, what do you want, right? You could be asking like casually if you didn't know what your kid wanted on top of their pizza, or you could be asking your best friend during a conversation that, is really important, like a conversation about life and how it's feeling and what they want. Or you could be asking someone in frustration or fear or anger if you were feeling threatened. So there are just so many different ways that question can sort of come out of our mouths. But I started to think about that as far as like this new year. I'm not really a fan of New Year's resolutions. If they work for you, that's great. I think anything that works for you is great. But I have found, and I haven't done actual sort of traditional New Year's resolutions in years, but when I did, they became kind of like a list of things to feel bad about in February. And part of that is, we don't really, human beings, we do not make changes until the thing that we have been doing, we get to that moment of like, okay, I have to do something else. I have to do things a different way. If I keep doing what I've been doing, I'm going to keep getting what I've been getting. That old quote, right? It's that enough moment. It's that like life is just, sometimes it's somebody like hitting bottom, or it's just like a relationship ends or a job ends, whatever it is. It's just this moment where the person has decided that's it. Until you get to that point, you're probably not going to be changing too many things, especially when it comes to habits. And habits can be, of course, things like, if we're talking about habits that are probably not serving you, we talking about like, smoking cigarettes, but it could also be a habitual way of thinking, like no one likes me or everyone else gets the breaks. I've talked to so many people over the years who have these loops going in their heads, and that can be a habit. A default of saying no when somebody asks you to do something social. It's like that can also become something that's just like you're doing it before you're even having a moment to feel or think or consider, whether something might be interesting or fun or good for you to get out of your comfort zone. So resolutions have never really been my, my go-to around the end of one year and the beginning of another, but writing prompts can be really helpful. And it occurred to me the other day that I could just sit and answer the question, what do you want? And that might be really good for me. Now, I did not grow up thinking about what I wanted very often. It was certainly not a daily part of my routine. And part of it, I think, has to do with like Gen X. I was born in 1971. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And it just was it was a whole different era. And I know we have a lot of jokes about Gen X and Gen Z and, and the generalizations are certainly there, but I do think there's a lot of truth to that experience that a lot of us who grew up in the 70s and then were teenagers in the 80s, there was just a lot of kind of, freedom. Like you're going out for the day, you're going to entertain yourself and, see you at dinner. I grew up in New York City I was a latchkey kid. My parents split when I was 4, so I was going back and forth between two homes. And I started navigating like public transportation when I was 8. So it's, 3rd grade. I was taking the public bus to school. That would be unheard of today to put your 8-year-old. I mean, maybe in some places, or, if there were like a bunch of kids going together, you might, but for the most part, it's not something that people are generally doing, certainly not in a big city. So this whole idea of like, what do you like? I think about how many times as my kids were growing up, I would be checking in with them, like, hey, you're like, we could go to the library or we could go to the beach, like, what do you want to do? Or like, what would you like for dinner? Or there's a lot of me checking in to see what they wanted in small ways and big ways. And I think you can go over the top with that stuff too. There's a balance. It's like sometimes this is what's for dinner because this is what's in the house and this is what, this is what I'm making. But certainly when when the opportunity presented itself, I did want them to be thinking about what they wanted, what they liked, what felt joyful, what felt like something they didn't really want to do. I was never somebody to force my kids to hug someone to make the like grown up feel better. I just, I think because of my own childhood and my own background, I was really tuned into like knowing this is an important thing, to be able to identify how you feel and what you want. That's really helpful for life. Those are like really important life skills if you want to kind of know what the next right step is for you. There's no formula for this thing, right? We're just here, we're on this planet, we're doing the best that we can. And so in order to kind of know when you come to a fork in the road, which way to go, or if you're in a situation and it isn't feeling right, knowing how you feel and what you want are going to be key elements in figuring out what to do next. And I had to like learn that from the ground up. That just was not something that, that sort of muscle, that groove in yoga, we would call it samskaras, right? The grooves, the joined action, like that wasn't there for me. I didn't have kind of the neural pathways to be thinking about what I wanted as far as making choices. I remember I was in therapy in my 20s, and I remember the therapist saying to me, I was in this relationship and it was just not, it just was not. And the therapist was saying to me, what do you do for fun in this relationship? And I was completely stopped in my tracks because fun had not even occurred to me. Like, oh, wait, is it supposed to be fun? Like, I can't really think of any fun thing that we're doing. Like, and that was such a kind of like, revelation, that moment of rethinking, like what's happening in my brain when I'm going into friendships, relationships. Like, am I thinking about whether it's fun or interesting or exciting, or whether I feel good or I like the version of myself that I become in relationship to this other person? Like, I wasn't thinking along those lines at all. And so I had to really kind of like work that, rewire that whole thing. And in my life, that what do you want thing, they're only the really huge things have come through that lack of, wiring. Like I knew for sure I wanted to have kids. I knew that. I could have told you that in my 20s really clearly. I knew that I wanted to find work that was going to feel fulfilling and hopefully help other people. I knew that. So those are good, big things to know. But there were so many other things I just did not know. And I really didn't trust my ability to be listening, to my own body, to my own. I had cut myself off from my feelings for so long, I couldn't even identify what they were anymore. And I think there is a gender part of this too that I want to dig into a little bit. Part of it for me was very much my family of origin. There's no doubt about that. And so if you had like if things were different in your household, that's great. But I grew up in a very traditional, I think, when it comes to gender roles, two households, right? My mom's and my dad's, both very, very much like girls do this, boys do that. And what girls were supposed to do was be kind, helpful, nurturing, thoughtful, considerate. It was sparkly, pink, rainbows, ponies, unicorns, baby dolls, like that. And boys were allowed to be rowdy, rambunctious. They could take up space. They could come into a room and be yelling. It was just like that. It was very, very old school. This is how we do. And that was also reflected in the bigger culture around me. So even at school, there's a really clear delineation of okay, the girls and the boys. And I think because for a lot of reasons that I probably won't get into too much today, I was trying so hard to get everything right. I was trying to be perfect. A lot of it was just trying to get my mom to love me in a way that felt like love to me. She did love me, but I think when I was like a kid, it didn't feel that way. And so I was trying to get everything right. I was trying to figure out, okay, what are the rules? And once I know what the rules are, I can do that. And so I always got really good grades, and I was the kid the teachers liked because I would pay attention. I would raise my hand. I would know the answers. I was really working hard for that approval. But what would happen is a lot of the time you'd be, as a girl in a classroom, tasked with helping one of the boys stay on task, or, you'd sort of be given these responsibilities, and it felt like a gold star, right? It felt like, oh, I'm being acknowledged for doing a good job, and now the teacher's asking me to help with something. And so that became sort of an ingrained idea in my mind. And just over and over again, as I was growing up, it was all about, what can I do for other people? That's where my value is, in what I can do for other people and how I look. Those are the two things. If I had to say, what were the messages I was getting from the people really close to me, my parents, family, and what were the messages I was getting from the culture, society? And it was those two things. Girls are supposed to be nice, kind, nurturing, helpful, and they're supposed to look, a certain way, not take up too much space. I know for sure I started restricting calories when I was 8, because of something a family member said to me. And it was devastating. It's just like this. I went through a lot that year. Both of my parents got married, and a month apart. And it wasn't a coincidence. It's kind of like my dad, as soon as my mom got engaged, my dad proposed to his girlfriend, who'd been living with us for 4 years, and her entire family had disowned her because she was living in sin. And so, and I put that in quotes, they were, Catholic, and they were devastated that this is what she had decided to do. So she'd already paid a significant price for being with him. And it wasn't until my mom got engaged that he decided to propose to her. And he did it because he asked me, would you like it if I was like, what, why I'm the decider of whether you get married? This is so crazy. But you don't have words for that either when you're 7, 8 years old. So it was a rough, just a lot of change going on. And I went from being this bony, elbows and knees kind of kid to suddenly just having a little more, meat on my bones. And I think I was eating my feelings kind of. And I was about to take a bite of a chocolate bar, and a family member said to me, that's why you're getting chubby, because you're eating too much. And I threw it out, and I never ate another one again. And And that's like a thing that I really remember as the beginning of disordered eating and body dysmorphia, because I look back at pictures of myself at 8 and it was just like, it was normal. It was just normal childhood, probably looked healthier then than I had before. So it's just really sad when I think back on that. But even that was like a beginning of forget about what I want. Like maybe I need to be careful about what I want. Maybe my desire is dangerous. And if I listen to my desire, maybe I'm going to pay a price and not look the way I should, or not be acting the way I'm not going to get that approval that I want. And I think it's a really common thing too, like when motherhood in our society, in our culture, it's so, this idea of being selfless, and putting the kids first. And look, I think because again of, my own childhood and my own experience, when I had my children, I was 36 when I had my son and 39 when I had my daughter. I was so ready. I was so ready for them. And I had done a lot of work on myself at that point. I'd been practicing yoga started when I was 20. So I had a lot of time to really be kind of figuring out a lot of these things that were getting in my way. And I was able to receive them as just like the absolute miracles, that they were, that they are, that they continue to be. And whether you want to talk about a spiritual miracle or scientific doesn't really matter to me. The point is like, when you actually push a human being out of your body and then there's this tiny little baby that you've been feeling like the elbows and the knees moving around inside of you, and now you're like looking at them, you're looking at that little face and those tiny little fingers and 10 tiny little fingernails and tiny little toes. Like, it's just like, it is a miracle. It's like unbelievable. And so I was able to receive them that way. And, my feeling is we all deserve to be received that way. We all deserve to be received with love and with, wonder and amazement and gratitude, and to be nurtured and cherished and treasured. And like, we all deserve that. We don't all get it. And sometimes it's just like your parents are wherever they are on their own timeline when you show up. And it's a good thing when you get old enough to realize like, oh, a lot of the things that I took as like a reflection on me somehow, they had nothing to do with me. This is just, my parents are just human beings, and they were having a life that precedes me, by at least a couple of decades. My mom was 24 when she had me. My dad was, he was like 50, is that right? Was he 45? No, he was 40. He was 45. They have like 19 years between them. So he was like 44, 45 when he had me. And then like, as I got older, he got older. That's how it works. And so, I think when I started to really understand, parents are just human beings, and they're flawed, and they're not these godlike creatures that I think we feel like they are when we're tiny and we're looking up and they're like, if we're going to have a roof over our heads, or we're going to have something to eat, or we're going to have any kind of shelter and safety at all, it's coming from them. So there is this sense of like, these people are all powerful and all knowing. And then you get older and you're like, oh, no, they're not. So I think that I gained a lot of compassion for my mother when I realized she just had so much trauma in her life. Her father had died really suddenly at 13, and her mom passed away when she was 28. I was 4. And then my dad left the next week. They had been keeping up appearances. And so she went through a lot of loss and shock, and she was not somebody who was ever going to seek help. She was not going to admit there was an issue. She was not going to go to therapy. She didn't even like to have like uncomfortable conversations with the people closest to her, so including me. Like, she just wouldn't admit there was an issue. So I think that she was carrying a lot of this rage that would just like bust out at different moments. And I think some of her rage I know it was about these societal norms, and things that were expected of women. And sometimes when I think, my mom, as soon as my dad left, I think she was on a little bit of a mission to find a husband. This is now 1974, almost 75. And she, women could not have their own credit cards or bank loans until 1974. So they needed either a husband, brother, dad to go with them. So I think for her, she really did feel like, I need to find a husband. That's how I'm going to make us safe. And so I just, when I look back on things for her, I think a lot of her rage, I understand it now as a grown woman in this society. And so when I came out of that childhood, those households, as I started to get older, I was not wired to be thinking about what do I want as a baseline sort of question for choices and decisions. That just wasn't part of the mix. And I know that, and that's something that I have, that's been part of my work for a really long time, is to try to identify what I want. And certainly, I think it's one of the reasons that I was so drawn to yoga, is because it pulls you into your body. Instead of being like up in that cerebral, that racket of thoughts and ideas and, shoulds and all that stuff, worries and what am I supposed to do? And well, if I don't do that, then what's going to happen? All that stuff. And just like drop down into my body and really started to breathe and get curious about sensation, get curious about my response to things when I was on my mat. Like if I couldn't do a pose easily right away, that was not, I was, perfectionist. Like I was used to like, okay, if I set my mind to something, I should just do it. And there are always going to be poses for people, where there's challenge or there's confrontation. And so I got to kind of see, that's hard for me. If I can't do something easily right away, a lot of feelings come up for me: shame, fear, very harsh inner critic. And so I started to work on that, because I'm like, well, that's not going to help me in my life. That's not going to be a good thing. If every time something doesn't come easily or right away, I'm going to berate myself. That's no way to live. But that wiring is strong. It takes years to set up. It takes years to unravel and create something different. And so that was a lot of my work. I would say for even the first 15 years of practicing, was just trying to quiet that inner critic and replace that voice with a voice that was kind and encouraging and compassionate, the way that I would speak to anyone else in my life I cared about. Anyone else, if they couldn't do something or were struggling, I would never be berating someone, but I was doing that to myself. So when that kind of light bulb went off, I knew I gotta really look at that. And so that has been like a lot of my growth, and a lot of the reason that I do feel ease and peace in my life to any degree is because of that, just like really learning to be able to sit with uncomfortable feelings, understand where they're coming from, have some compassion for myself, and then, figure out, okay, what's the next right thing to do given all of that. In our culture, when you have children, especially mothers, really there is a tremendous amount of judgment that comes at you right away. And even when I was pregnant with my son, and I am in the, Southern California yoga community, so there is that going on. But what happens is people start sending you videos of a woman giving birth at the ocean, the ocean shore there with dolphins frolicking in the background. She squats down, pushes out the baby, and starts breastfeeding right there on the beach. There's this instant kind of, this is how you should do this now, if you want to get the A plus, for childbirth in the yoga community, this is what it needs to look like. And I ended up not having that kind of birth. Nothing went according to my plan. I had a written out like 5-page birth plan, no drugs, don't talk to me about drugs, like dim lights, I'm going to be squatting and doing yoga and all kinds of things through this labor. And that's not what happened. And I'm not going to share what happened right now, but the bottom line and the only thing that really matters is my son and I are here. We made it. It was so not my plan that for the better part of a 24-hour labor, it was really touch and go whether we were making it, we were not making it. So it was rough. And, then you bring the baby home and then there's all the other stuff, like, well, how are you like sleep training? Are you baby wearing? Are you attachment, like, what are you doing? And for me, what felt better was attached, both of my kids were just like on me all the time. But that's what felt good and better to me. And I think some of it with my son was the trauma of the birth. I think there was fear. Like I needed to keep him close to me so I could keep him safe. But even after, like, I got through that because I had to do some work around that too. Like, I don't want to be in like fear all the time as a mom. That's not good. I don't want to be like, constantly worrying and making myself sick with worry. So I had to do some work on that and kind of like just releasing that, kind of just trying to have some faith and trust that like all would be well. He was going to be fine. I was going to be fine. It was all going to be okay. But even after that, that just felt easier and better for me. I had the kids on me all the time. When I went to teach, I had a baby in a sling. Like I turned my morning yoga class into a mommy and me class. And I invited like all the moms in the area to come with their kids and just let them crawl around on the floor while I taught a regular vinyasa flow class, because so many mothers are like, they want to be able to go to a yoga class and they can't afford childcare. It's like there's a lot of realities here where sometimes someone will say something like, I'm really struggling as a new mom. And the response is, well, you got to sleep when the baby sleeps. Well, you can't always, we're not like machines. You can't always just like snap your fingers and nap. I'm not a good napper. Like, I have to be so exhausted and all the conditions have to be right for me to nap. And so things like that can be when you're in the beginning few years. And I watched Night Bitch a few weeks. I've got to tell you, if you are a woman who had children, has children, those first few years, if you ever were interested in seeing a film that actually depicts what it's like that movie hit it out of the park, because it is all encompassing, and you're in a constant state of giving. Now, listen, there are some women that go back to work, like they're home for a little while and then the baby's in daycare or they've got somebody coming to that, whatever it is, and they're going back to work. So there's not like, you're not going to paint all mothers with one brush. There's all shapes and sizes and different ways of doing things. I have friends who like swear by sleep training. I could not do it. I couldn't do it for a lot of reasons. I couldn't do it because the second I heard either of my kids crying, I had to go. I would break out in a sweat. Like there wasn't any option. I was going. I'm also in a small house and I had a toddler. So if I let my daughter scream, my toddler's waking up. Like all these people that are like, well, you have to do it this way. It's like, well, okay, but I don't have that kind of life or that kind of house. And it doesn't feel right to me. So there is no one right way for anything. But the reason that I'm kind of veering off in this for a moment is because I'm trying to get across the level of judgment in every area that girls and women face all the time. And the ingrained, like the messaging that you get as a result is, I'm supposed to do things this way or that way. This is how I do it right. Or this is how I get, some kind of approval or appreciation or something, is by grabbing these brass rings, and all the rings are garbage. Like just, I just want to say, like, you got to do the best you can in this world and in this culture to not buy into that stuff, because none of us whatever genders, none of our value is about how we look or what we're able to provide for other people. I mean, of course, it's wonderful to be a giving person. And the people close to you, if you are a giving person, certainly are going to appreciate that. But if you're giving in order to get the gold star, that's not it. If you're giving because it feels really good to give, beautiful. As long as you're not giving to a degree that is causing you harm, or to a degree that where everything in your mind is always on what other people need and want, and you're never kind of turning that question back onto yourself. And I think for a long time that was me. I just was so focused on, okay, taking care of everyone around me, that I really didn't even, to stop and think about, well, how does this feel to me? Or what do I want? That felt selfish. That's what my wiring taught me. It's selfish to consider what you want, or what's the best scenario for you. It's your job is to think about what's the best scenario for other people. And I do not think that I am, alone in that. I think a lot of girls and women come out of this society feeling that way. I also think that a lot of this gender stuff, there's so many people up in arms about kids using they, them pronouns. And I have to say, if somebody had come to me at 12 and said, you have 3 choices, okay? You're born assigned female at birth. You can go down that path of what a girl is supposed to be. And for me at 12, it would have been nurturing, kind, helpful, sparkly mermaids, unicorns, whatever. Or you can be a boy, and that means you can be rowdy, you can be loud, you can take up space, you can the ways that the boys, even at school, were treated versus the way the girls is so different. The expectations were so skewed. Things that boys got away with, girls would never have gotten away. They would have been sent to the principal's office. He just, you reached across the table and pulled some boy's hair really hard or smacked his back, you'd be in trouble. But the reverse was not the case, right? And so if someone had said to me, you can go down that path where you have a lot of freedom to just take up space and be loud and say whatever you were, not worry about what people are gonna don't worry about getting it right all the time, or you have this third option where you don't have to choose either of those paths and you can just kind of figure it out when you're ready. Believe me, I would have taken option 3. And I think most kids would. Nobody wants to be told how they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to feel and how they're supposed to act. That's not how do you figure out who you are when you're especially at that age, right? Prepubescent, moving into puberty, in puberty, this is when you're not supposed to know, and you don't have to know. All this fear around it is just it really is so unnecessary and disheartening, and also really heartbreaking, because it's everyone just back off. Let these kids figure. They are more, this is a more sane approach than anything any of us grew up with. And it's empowering, right? To be allowed to just figure out how you feel and embody, the kind, your, whatever it is, embody that yourself, what aspects resonate with you and which ones don't. I really feel so much of the pain that a lot of people, Gen X people and prior, have experienced has come from this editing out of feelings and behaviors, because the culture tells me that's not okay. If I'm a girl or a woman and I'm angry, our culture does not like angry women. It's getting better because there are a lot of us and we're not sitting down anymore. But it's not there yet, and there's still like a lot of backlash. I was talking last week about this whole, and I don't want to talk about it anymore, but this whole Blake Lively thing. I actually saw a woman this week saying, why didn't if it was so bad, why did she keep filming? Why didn't she just, and it's like, okay, are you kidding me? Like, she was under contract. So you're saying she should break her contract and not work anymore because she was being harassed in the workspace? Like, if that's, this is a woman saying this, I don't even know what to say about that. Like, women everywhere are supposed to quit their jobs when men harass them at work. Forget, none of us will be working. Sorry, but like, that's just it. So, a lot of this stuff is really deeply ingrained, and ambitious women, articulate women who like will not just back down or sit down or be quiet. It's still a struggle. It's not easy. So we're not anywhere. It's not like we're so far from where we were when I was growing up. It's like everything in life. It's like it takes a lot of fight before things move like a few degrees. And I'm going to tell you also, like, I had to advocate for my daughter because when she went to kindergarten, there was a little boy at her table, and he was very rambunctious and just had a really tough time focusing and staying on task. And the teacher ended up like loving my daughter and basically having her help her friend stay focused. So what that turned into is, this kid basically, he started following my daughter around the entire day. So recess would come and she'd want to go play with her friends, but he'd be there and she would feel like her job was to take care of him and not hurt his feelings. And so she would play with him and not go off and play with her other friends. I didn't know this, right? My child's going to kindergarten all day. I'm picking her up at the end of the day. One day I pick her up and she's in tears. She gets in the car and she just and I said, what is happening? And she started to explain to me how, I'm supposed to help him. And, I do, like and then in a little 5-year-old voice, calling me mommy and like, telling me like, it's my job. Like, one of my jobs is to make sure he is, doing his work. And sometimes he talks a lot and I have to tell him like, you got to be quiet and pay attention. And, and so, but now I'm supposed to like take care of him during recess. I said, wait a second. First of all, who told you have to take care of him? What's going on? The teacher. Now, the teacher did not tell my daughter she had to take care of him during recess. That's just what happened. This is a 5-year-old little boy. He thinks, well, she's taking care of me. I'm with her. But I had to go talk to the teacher, a woman who I loved, by the way, and just say to her like, hey, I'm not okay with that. I would like my daughter to be moved to a different table. This is not her job. Her job is not to take care of she's a child. I want her to be able to focus and do her own work. And I'm not trying to, like, I want her to have compassion and be kind and care about other people, but not to this degree where she is now, sacrificing what is good for her to help someone else. That's not okay with me. So I had to do that, not just in kindergarten, in first grade. I had to keep this same thing kept happening. And it still happens. Like, it still happens, she's 15 now. And there is still this vibe of like, can you help? Like, you're a good student. Can you, and it's like, it's skewed. It's not what it should be. And it's not okay, but that is what starts to happen. And if you grew up in an alcoholic household, which I didn't really mention, but that's part of like a big part of what happened for me and my wiring is you're constantly on high alert, looking for trouble, trying to figure out how to make the other person okay, or what you can do to keep yourself safe, or you're looking for clues. My dad was like crying in my arms all the time. So it's just, you get this, you're a sponge. You're a kid growing up in this culture. You have whatever family of origin you have, and then you have the world around you, like it's school, and the messages are seeping in, and you're making sense of things to the best that you can, being a kid. So it takes a lot of work to kind of undo that. And I wanted to share all of that stuff because there are so many different reasons why you might not ask yourself, what do I want? And I mean that for everyone, not just girls and women, just across the board. I think that, there are a lot of reasons that anybody could grow up in a household and just not be thinking about what do I want, or how do I feel, or what would be good for me in this situation. But I do think that it does skew heavily toward women who don't have that wiring and don't approach choices and decisions that way. And even choices and decisions like about deeply personal things that are going to impact them. They're still thinking about, well, how's it going to be for other people? Or if I say what I want or pursue what I need, I'm going to hurt someone's feelings, and I don't want to do that. Or I'm going to let someone down, or like I'm only justified to leave a situation if it's really, really bad, but not if it's just like, this just doesn't feel right anymore. This doesn't feel, it doesn't feel like this is growing anymore. Or I don't like the version of myself I have to be in this relationship anymore. This doesn't feel like what I want life to feel like. And so I need to make some different choices. Like, there's not a lot of support for that line of thinking, particularly for women. It's like, I'm on this page on Facebook, and I think I've mentioned it before, and it's a page somebody added me to. And I won't go into too much, but it's about like 35,000 women from across the country, every socioeconomic demographic, every demographic, like just, it's a wide and very interesting group of women. And I see like the questions, sometimes the questions are like, oh, I'm going to a wedding this weekend. Which dress should I wear? Vote. But sometimes it's like my teenage child is in a relationship with someone, and their family has really different views about like sex, or sometimes people are my kid, if they have somebody over, their door has to stay open, but now they're this person that they're spending time with, like that kid can shut the door and they can be in the, like those kinds of questions where it's like, oh, what do you do? What do you say? Or like, it'll be a woman who says, I'm in this marriage and I just don't feel, I'm really deeply unhappy, and I've tried therapy, and I've tried everything, and I've tried talking to my partner, and I've tried approaching things in a different way, and I've tried wanting less or needing less, or, going out with my girlfriends instead, or like whatever. I've done all the things I can, and I still don't feel okay. But my husband's a good guy. I can't tell you how many people are like, you should stay. Like, and, it's like, well, I mean, should you? You get one life here, as far as we know, right? So it's like, I don't know what you should or shouldn't do, because I'm not in your situation, and I'm not in your body, and I'm not in that house or in that marriage. I actually don't know what you should do, but there's just so much support for like, oh, if you feel like your physical or emotional safety is at risk, you leave. But otherwise, you made a commitment, you should stay. Now, look, I do think people walk away from things too easily, and it's like there's a line here, there's a balance. But if you feel like your soul is being crushed in a relationship, that is a legitimate reason to make a different decision, to make a different choice. I think a lot of women struggle with that. And there are just so many ways that we can get stuck and tell ourselves like, okay, I made some choices. I can't, that's it. Like, those are the choices I've made. And so, I mean, to get unstuck or to change things, too many people would be impacted. My grown kids might be really disappointed or really upset, or, this like level of upheaval is not something, wouldn't be good for anyone. Like, you can talk yourself out of stuff before you even get the thought out of your head or the words out of your mouth of what it is that you might want. And so I decided the other day, I was like, I want to just get clear on where I'm at. It's like the end of the year, and I like to do that kind of like purging anyway in the house, in my head. It's like, you know what? I'm just going to write what I want. Like if I could have anything at all, if there was no holds barred, like no one else to worry about, nothing else to think about, just for like, I'm just talking about writing it down. I'm not talking about doing any of it or sharing it with anyone. I'm just going to let myself write like stream of consciousness, like what I would want if I could have anything. And I did. I just wrote it. It like came, it was so, just came right out of me. I wrote for about an hour, and some of the things really surprised me. I didn't allow myself to say you can't have that, or that could never work, or like that's crazy, or like I just didn't do any of that. I did not let the peanut gallery get involved, or any fear about anything, because it was just like, just write your fantasy down of like what you would want in a perfect world if you could have it. And I really think that is an excellent exercise, especially if you do struggle with like giving yourself permission to do things just because you want to, or just because they're fun. I'm not talking, I'm not talking about like wildly, you just, whatever you want. Go, I'm not talking about, I'm saying at least write it. Just write it out so you can see it. Then you can figure out, okay, what of these things, if any of them, do I actually want to pursue, And what of these things could I say, you know what, actually, that might be really hard for the people that I love the most, or like whatever, then you can kind of like get into that conversation with yourself. But at least write it so you are clear on what in your heart of hearts you would want if you could have anything. Write it, like just write it down. You can like whatever, shred it later if you want to, but like write it down so that you know what those things are. And if there's a big distance between what comes out of you and what your life is like right now, I do think there is, a serious conversation to be having with yourself about maybe this is not how I want things to be for the next 20 years. Maybe I need to make some changes and think about that. Because you don't, I think that the way you can be of service the most in this world is when you are feeling lit up, when you are feeling inspired and you're feeling creative and you're feeling like you're in your power, And so I think that it's not just robbing yourself. It's also, you're not allowing your light to shine the way that it could if you were thinking about things differently. And I do think about, because for me, part of what goes on too has to do with not wanting to upset other people or let other people down. There have been so many times in my life where I've had to make a decision, small or large, where I could make a decision that would be good for me and right for me and is probably the obvious decision to make, but another party might be upset, disappointed, angry. Or I could make the decision that's going to keep them calm and pleased and not be really great for me. And so many times in my life, I've picked B instead of A for people who really don't deserve that. Also, for people who maybe haven't been that great to me, still, hard for me to put an equal or higher value on what makes sense for me. And I can't really share too specifically because, it's not just my story that I'm talking about here. But I just have been in situations many times in my life with my mom. Like anytime I'm in a relationship with someone who has like rage or I perceive as like someone I need to be taken care of, and there's a decision that needs to be made, I'm probably picking what's good for the other person, even if it's at my own expense. And that's not healthy. That's not a good thing. This isn't me telling you, oh, I'm so selfless. Aren't I like wonderful? No, That's not what that is. I wouldn't want anybody to model themselves after that, because there is a point where your fear of confrontation or like worry about how someone else is going to feel or trying to manage somebody else's feelings or expectations, like it's, you've gone past the point of being unselfish into the point of like, just like it's just not healthy. You've gone too far. You've gone too far over that line of, and it isn't about your compassion. It's about your fear of confrontation or your fear of what it's going to feel like if somebody is disappointed in you or angry with you, or it's all that stuff. It's like it's not healthy to be sacrificing your own well-being for someone else, because if you don't, then there'll be some kind of emotional hell to pay. Like you'll be having like horrible conversations, or they'll scream at you or whatever it is. Like that's not a good reason to not make the right decision for yourself. And that's a thing. That's kind of like the final, like bit of work that I need to do on that part of things, is just honoring like what I want and not putting other people's needs and feelings that I don't want to, putting that ahead. That's something that's kind of like the final piece of the puzzle. I still hesitate or struggle if I come up to that like fork in the road. I really want to go down the path that's like least resistance, not gonna, result in like whatever, angry conversations, or, it's like, it's that whole peacekeeping thing. And I'm making myself go the other way. I'm just like, no, I'm done with that. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm 53. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to start making decisions unemotionally, right? Like when it comes to if we're talking about something like that, like a choice that needs to be made about what you're going to do, I'm going to try really hard to think about what would the other person do in this situation. And if it's like clearly, obviously they would go, then that's what I'm going to do too. Like I'm not going to keep sacrificing my own well-being to make other people happy. And I think that's a really good thing to look at if you resonate with that, if that's something that you also struggle with. So I'm never going to be the person who is like, I don't care how this impacts anyone else. I'm doing what I want. Like that's never happening. I can be 108 and I really don't see that happening. But I think that if you are someone who understands and has the same thing, like doesn't really think about yourself, it might be time to start at least putting yourself in the mix at the same level as the other people you're considering, right? Like if that's what's going on. The only people that I put outside of that circle are my children. I'm still, and always, I brought these people into this world and I want them to be happy and inspired and free. And I want them to have like great lives. And so anything and everything I can do to support that, I'm going to do. Right now my kids are, my youngest is 15 and my oldest is 18. It's like, they still need me in certain ways and I'm not going anywhere, like that's a given. But short of that, anyone else, it's like I am a grown woman and I'm going to start making decisions that make sense for me. And, not everybody's going to like it. Whenever you change something up, you can almost, you can count on the people that have been used to you being a certain way for years and decades. If you suddenly are like, yeah, you know what though? That does not make sense for me. I know that's better for you, but that doesn't make sense for me and I can't do it anymore. You can count on some big feelings coming your way because people, they don't see that coming. They have started to, just like we all do, right? We think we have everything understood, and well, this person is this way and they do this, and they're we know somebody like the back of our hands. And I was teaching last Sunday in a yoga class, and like I was talking about that tendency to think we know. Like sometimes you'll say to somebody, well, have you said this to the other person? They're like, well, I know what they're going to say. I've already said this to them a million other times and I know what they're going to say. Maybe you do. I think like with my mother, there were certain things, like certain conversations I stopped trying to have because I did know from past experience she wasn't going to go there with me and it wasn't going to go well and I wasn't going to get any kind of like satisfying, conversation. But at the very end of her life, very end, last 3 weeks of her life, a lot of healing happened, So it's like, I always like to keep the door open just a little bit for someone to maybe eventually have an epiphany. Do I think it's likely to happen in many cases? No, probably not. But you just never know. But I think by and large, like that idea of having people pegged is dangerous, like thinking you already know. That's how marriages get into trouble. Long-term partnerships, like people think, well, I know this person. I know them like the back of my hand. And I was saying, like, take a look at the back of your hand. Like, when's the last time you looked at the back of your hand? And I bet that it doesn't look like it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15. Like, we're all changing all the time. And so, thinking that or doing both sides of a conversation with someone in your head instead of actually saying how you feel is not really a good way to go. And if nothing else, at least you've communicated. You've said what you want or how you feel or what you need. And then it's up there. People are going to do whatever they're going to do. And that goes back to my New Year's resolutions thing. People generally do what they want to do, which is why if someone's like dating somebody and they're not really showing up and they're, making excuses for that, like, oh, well, they're just really busy or they have a lot of trauma in their background. But people do what they want to do. If somebody wants to, be with you, they're going to make it clear. They're not, people generally do what they want to do. But going back to the, habits and sort of like resolution thing from the beginning of the talk, and this is where I'll end. I think figuring out what you want and communicating it, even just to yourself, right? Like I was saying, just let yourself, just stream of consciousness, just write things down. Don't worry about whether they're realistic or how people would feel or what just don't do any of that. Just write it down. Like let all that go and just say, perfect world, anything I want, what would it be? Let yourself write that out. And then, really consider like whether this is a tough issue for you, thinking about what you want and then maybe acting on it. Like so easy for me to act on my kids' behalf, but not as easy for me to act on my own behalf. Just like kind of really examine that stuff. And then when you get to that point of like, I need to make some changes, that enough moment, you will like have some faith in yourself, but at least get the, like, what do I want out of your head, out of your heart, like onto a piece of paper where you can look at it and maybe you'll surprise yourself. And I kind of really hope that you do. I hope you have at least a few surprises if you decide to do this, because I certainly did. And that's good information to have. It's good information to have. This is it. Your life's happening right now. It's not happening in 5 years or 10 years or when things calm down or when, whatever, there's more money or you have a bigger house or like this is your life right now, today, this minute. So it is really good to kind of check in with yourself every so often and just see how you're doing, see how you are. And maybe there's some like course corrections you want to make moving into a new year. And I know it's been a real rough year for a lot of us, not all of us. And I know that it's like, saying Happy New Year right now might feel strange. I think for me, if I'm saying Happy New Year, it's like, what I mean is like, I want your happiness. Like, I hope that you put a value on that to some degree. And I hope that all of us can be doing our best to keep the people in our community safe and keep our loved ones safe and really try to take tangible action, in that regard and be the safety net. be the safety net. So finding this balance between being the safety net, trying to make sure the people around you have what they need and are safe, and also thinking about, what do I want in my life, big picture, and am I moving in the right direction? Do I need to make some changes? So yeah, I hope this is helpful conversation. I hope you give yourself, a little bit of time to just write. And I really am wishing you a happy new year and a lot of love and good health and good surprises. And until next time, I'm sending you love.